Let's get back to your focus on renewable energy and policy around that. I want to dig a little deeper into the idea of market forces that are making renewables, more popular, and whether you believe that market forces alone are enough to lower emissions to the Paris targets, let's say, which is somewhat arbitrary, but let's just say that.
Yeah. I think it's a question of speed. Eventually market forces would work, but we want to do it faster. I mean, we already are damaging the planet with the accumulation of greenhouse gases. So that's where government comes in, to speed things up. But it doesn't have to be the U.S. federal government. There are many other governments around the world that are thinking and working on this, and many companies and cities in particular are playing a leadership role. California and New York are both have goals within the middle of the 21st century of moving toward a majority renewable energy generation. And I think that's the kind of transition we're going to be seeing. And I think that's what we need. I don't think this isn't going to be an overnight transition. Energy is so important to so much of our lives. And what replaces fossil fuels has to be as cheap and convenient and reliable as fossil fuels. If it's not, it won't work.
And how close are we
we're close, but we don't have that transformative technology. We don't have the iPhone of renewable energy.
Is that the smart grid? I mean, is that part of it? You mentioned batteries and obviously being able to store solar or wind and then use it later on a cloudy day, right?
Right.
But what about the smart grid? Is that kind of infrastructure would seem to me would require major federal funding?
Well, let's think about how the original grid was built. It was built a piece at a time. There was federal involvement for places in rural areas. So you had the Tennessee Valley Authority and you had parts of the New Deal that had rural electrification. The market never would have reached those parts of the country without the government. But cities in particular, where most people live now, what you're starting to see is first the development of microgrids, which are institutions and communities setting up their own smart grids, and then we're going to knit them together. When the first grid was set up, it was done piece by piece. And it wasn't, nobody did the whole city or state at once, and then eventually it grew up. The smart grid will work the same way. In a sense, the way to think about it is grid modernization, giving the ability to have distributed generation of energy. But that's going to require a lot of action at the state level to change the business model of utilities. Now, New York State has a brilliant energy czar, a fellow named Richard Kaufman, who speaks eloquently about how we change the utilities so that they can make money and amortize their debt, but change the model from the current highly centralized fossil fuel-based model to a decentralized renewable energy-based model where the grid essentially plays a backup role.
Okay. So states like California and New York clearly have prioritized sustainable development, sustainable energy models. Are we living in a situation where, because this is up to states, and then you have a bunch of states in the middle of the country that are not interested in doing any of this, and where there is not the political will for that, where eventually you have a real disparity in quality of life, in things like air pollution locally and regionally, and how that affects human health?
It could happen that way, although interestingly enough, states like Texas generate enormous amounts of wind energy.
Huge, huge.
And you know, they're the leader. And I think
a lot of that done under Governor Perry.
And but it's not done because people want to get next to their feelings about the environment. It's done because it's cheaper than any other way to generate energy. So I think you're going to see more of that, and I think that those places in the middle of the country will be more reliant on the market bringing that to scale. On the coasts, I think we're going to see more of a public-private partnership. Ultimately, it has to be public and private. And again, it would be helpful if we had an active federal government, but it's not essential.